Hello, good morning. I'm Stuart Bowes. This is a Future Net Zero webinar, and it's part of a series of 3 we're doing with AMP Clean Energy, looking at 3 sort of areas that we think are really important. Today's discussion is all about industrial decarbonisation. And I'm delighted to say a family friend, a friend of the show is here, Stuart Reid. How are you, Stuart?
I'm great. Thanks, Stuart. Nice to see you again.
Stuart, would you let everyone know your official job title at AMP and what you sort of cover?
I am head of Net Zero Customer Solutions. So basically, I look after any project where we're entering a long-term contract to sell energy to our customers. So, and I'll explain a bit more about who we are and what we do later.
Yeah, fine. And for those who are new to the platform, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This will run for about 45 minutes to up to an hour, depending on how many questions, and we want lots of questions from you. It's very simple to use. This is the Bright Talk platform. You'll see a place where you can ask a question. Please type that in, and then we'll put that to Stuart probably towards the end of the presentation. And also during this presentation, there'll be a poll, like a vote thing. You can just go on it. Once I launch it, it'll be very simple. It'll say vote now, and you'll have 2 or 3 options, and just click that. And the final thing is, please let us know what you think of the webinar, rate it at the end, and if there are any questions that you have about anything that's raised, ask them while you can. If not, I'm sure, Stuart, you're happy to pick up questions afterwards for people to email you, yeah?
No problem.
No problem. All right, so without further ado, this session's all about industrial decarbonisation. No one could have missed that there's been a slight hiccup in Boris's plans, but he survived. And he said this morning, let's get on with it. Okay, he said his message is, I've survived my confidence vote. Let's get on with it. Let's get on with our policies, particularly our policies around the cost of living and getting us to net zero. So what do we do regarding how we take industry from where we are now to the eventual future that we want? You know, many stories are done about kind of what we can do to cut energy use at present, but there's also the wider stories around how we take the whole of the industry sector. How do we decarbonise, for example, the manufacturing of steel? How do we use heat better? How do we look at the way we use water? All of these things are all part of how we're going to shift the dial so that businesses like yours, those of you who are listening here today, can move towards being net zero. So I think it's going to be an incredibly important webinar to look through. Stuart, I'll hand over to you. I know you've got a few slides in a presentation. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, in the middle of it, there'll be a poll, but then afterwards, ask questions at any time. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. And I hope everybody can see the slides now. I take it you can see them okay, Stuart?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us. As Sumit says, this is the first of a series of 3 webinars that we at AMP Clean Energy are doing with Future Net Zero. There's a little bit of read across between them. This one's covering industrial decarbonisation. One of my colleagues, Mark Tarry, is doing one on hydrogen, and another colleague, Jill Alker, is doing one on heat and buildings. So there's obviously a bit of read across between the 3 of them, particularly around the industrial decarbonisation and hydrogen one, but obviously most industrial businesses also own buildings, so there's some relevance with heat and buildings there. So it's probably worth keeping an eye on the other 2 as well, which are happening over the next couple of days. By way of introduction, I've worked in renewables and particularly around renewable heat for coming on 15 years now. And I think we are in unprecedented times at the moment. There's obviously a lot going on at a policy level. There's a lot going on at a market level. And there's a lot going on in terms of the kind of the societal or the environmental factors. And what I'm going to try and do today is really outline what we see as being the current drivers that are really impacting people's focus on net zero, or businesses' focus on net zero. And then equally importantly, what we see as being some of the opportunities to make progress quickly on net zero targets and net zero policies. So hopefully this is a bit of a mix of the theoretical stroke policy environment and also some very practical things about what we see as being the opportunities for businesses to get on with. And without further ado, I will get into it. So a bit of an introduction to AMP Clean Energy first. So there's a couple of sides to our business. We're effectively a developer, funder, owner and operator of renewable and low carbon energy assets. And there's two key sides to the business on that development front. We have the side of the business that I look after, where we are working with customers, working with businesses, and developing and building low carbon energy assets on their site to help them decarbonise. So typically what we're doing there is developing and funding, so doing all the investment for the energy centre, the energy assets, and then having a long-term relationship to sell the low carbon energy that's generated on sites to those businesses. And on that side of the business, we've got around about 180 current assets. We've got about 100 million invested across those projects, and it's everything from hotels, care home size projects, right up to very large manufacturing facilities. So I'll talk a bit about some of what they are. The other side of our business, which is equally exciting, is around providing flexibility services to the grid. So we have a portfolio of gas peaking assets, and we have a portfolio of batteries. Now, it's not something I'm going to cover today, but having had a look at some of the people in the audience, one thing we are on the lookout for is sites to locate batteries on. So if that's something that you're thinking about or something that you're interested in, then that's something that we'd love to talk to you about. So particularly, we're focused on rolling out a large number of battery sites at a relatively small scale. So anyone who's listening who's got a big portfolio of assets or a big land bank that they think would be good locations to position batteries, then that's something that we'd be happy to talk about. As well as these development businesses, we also have quite a big operational biomass business. So we provide O&M services to over 1,000 biomass systems around the country, and we've got a big team of service engineers and fuel delivery logistics to support that. So really, we're really all about decarbonisation and the transition to net zero. And I think that's the key message, really. We not only develop projects, but we fund them and we operate them. So we're here for the long term. Example of some of the projects we're working on at the moment at the larger scale, so focused on kind of industrial stroke manufacturing base. The top left photo, we've just completed our first distillery project. So that photo you can see is in the construction phase. That system, which is a 5.5 megawatt biomass boiler, it's now operational, and we're producing the client there, who's Bunnahabhain whiskey, a fine brand. They're now producing low carbon whiskey for the first time on Islay, which is a very exciting development. Working clockwise round, we've also just constructed a 15.5 megawatt low carbon energy centre at Muntons Malt in Suffolk. So again, it's now operational, and it's decarbonising roughly 100 gigawatt hours per annum of their heat demand. So again, that's a massive statement from them, and they're signed up to science-based targets, and this is a key project in them meeting those science-based target commitments. We've got a couple of projects with Sunseeker Yachts. They're quite interesting because what we're doing there is we're using their waste product to generate heat and offset oil and gas consumption for space heating, and a little bit of process heating as well around some of their manufacturing process. The Croda Chemical Works, that's a 12 megawatt biomass system again, and that's going to decarbonise about 50 gigawatt hours. Massive saving in their Scope 1 emissions. So big project there. And then we're also active in the wider food production sectors. So we're helping glasshouses decarbonise. We've got a project within a salmon hatchery as well. So lots of stuff going on in this, what we'd call the sort of industrial stroke manufacturing base, so people who are using heat for processes. Just skipped past the slide there. So as I sit here today, I think the world's a very different place from what it was 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago, or even 18 months ago, I'd viewed the 2020s as very much being about the decade where we'd set the foundations for net zero. So this would be about a little bit of R&D to determine what's going to be the optimal solution. Is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be heat pumps? Is there going to still be a role for biomass? There'd be a lot of R&D work done, and then we'd get on with the sort of the full decarbonisation in the 2030s. So that was my view, and that's fundamentally changed. I think there's a number of reasons for that we'll get into, but the 2020s is now the decade where we absolutely have to get on with decarbonisation. And I think that's now widely accepted. And I think people are at the point where they just want to crack on with it. And the more academic questions around, what is going to be the optimal technology or what is the optimal solution, they're not being viewed as a barrier anymore. People are making decisions to get on with things and get on with them now. So hugely exciting times in the sector. And I think there's three key drivers for that. And I've put them into these headline categories. So the first is market dynamics. We're obviously in an unprecedented time for fossil fuel prices and carbon pricing. That's providing a lot of impetus at the moment for people to decarbonise. Second category is what I've called the policy push factors. So the headline message here is that the era of incentives is over, really. That the renewable heat incentive's gone. It's unlikely to be replaced by something similar. So instead of it being kind of carrot-based incentive policies to help people decarbonise, we're now seeing policy push people down that route. And I'll talk a bit about what some of those policy factors are. And then final key driver at the moment, and this is one that's really stayed strong even in the face of COVID, is that we're seeing lots of what I've called pull factors kicking in. So this is about consumer demand. It's about the expectation from society that businesses need to decarbonise and that they should be decarbonising. And that's happening from end user customers, and that's putting pressure right back through the supply chains and the manufacturing industries, so that even if your business is not a big customer facing brand, it's likely that your customers will be under severe pressure to reduce their emissions, and they're going to start by tackling their scope 3, i.e. putting pressure on you, the manufacturing base, to decarbonise. So these are what I've suggested are the kind of three key categories of drivers for really amplifying the push on to net zero. And I'll just talk a little bit more about each of these in turn. We've pulled together a chart here based on a Bayes data set for large demand users. So if you're not aware of this, Bayes published data every quarter showing what the typical energy prices paid by different categories of user are. So it goes large and very large. It goes all the way from domestic up to very large. We've used the large data set. The trend's similar, really, regardless of size. So you can see the top brown line is electricity prices. We've put in the EU ETS price as a proxy for carbon and UK ETS. Those two are moving quite closely together. And then the lighter brown line at the bottom is the gas prices. So you can see that over the last 12 years, there's been a steady increase, and that's been relatively, or it's been even more pronounced over the past couple of years. And then clearly, no surprise there, in the last 6 months, there's really been a huge jump in electricity prices, in gas prices, and in carbon price. So this market dynamic has happened a lot more quickly than we expected. So 15 months ago, we were getting towards financial close on one of our large projects. A significant investment for us, about £8 million onto a customer site. The customer at that time, the site director there, took the decision that he thought a sensible price for carbon was the equivalent of £50 a tonne, that would be a sensible long-term price. At that point, carbon price was about €19 per tonne. So it was a significant decision by him to use that £50 in his business case. 3 months later, after financial close, carbon price had exceeded that £50 per tonne, and we're now sitting up somewhere around the £80 per tonne mark. So carbon, for those businesses that are paying ETS, EU ETS as was, and UK ETS going forward, carbon price is now a significant driver. It's worth remembering that £100 per tonne of carbon is the equivalent of about 2p in the gas price. So carbon is now very real. Carbon pricing is now very real, and a very significant driver for those who are impacted. And we've seen from some of the consultations that are around in UK ETS that's going to stay the same going forward, and I'll cover that in more detail. So carbon price significantly important. We've put a flat line curve in that going forward. I don't think it'll stay flat. I think the direction of travel is going to be upward, but who knows on that. Gas price and electricity price are moving together, as we've seen over the last 6 months, with gas setting the marginal cost of electricity. So any upward curve in gas price is having a corresponding impact in electricity price. And that's interesting for a number of reasons. The yellow and red lines going forward there, they are the current market forward prices for gas and electricity. Doesn't necessarily mean that you could go out and forward buy at those prices, but it's a good indication of where the markets expect the prices to go. And what we can see is that even out to 2026, those prices are remaining higher than at any point really up till Q3 2021. So I think the sense is that high gas and electricity prices are here to stay for the coming years. So what this means is that renewable energy projects, or projects that save carbon, are now more financially viable than they were 6 months ago, before this price shock took effect. And the consensus is that these high prices, whilst they'll probably drop from current peaks, are going to be here to stay going forward in some shape or form. So that's the market dynamic. The second category I'd mentioned was the policy push factors. So we have seen the end of RHI. So most businesses are now decarbonising Scope 2 emissions, i.e. the electricity purchase, is relatively straightforward. I think everybody's aware of that. You can just go and buy Regos just now, and that means you've argued that you've hit your decarbonisation target for electricity, Scope 2 emissions. So most businesses are now thinking about Scope 1, and it's really these Scope 1 emissions which are the hard to crack ones. So the end of the RHI makes that Scope 1 decarbonisation less incentivised, said. Now, if fossil fuel prices stay where they are from the previous slides, then the incentive becomes less important, because the counterfactual is a high cost base anyway. So what we've seen is what the government have said is that they're going to align the UK ETS with the net zero trajectory. So i.e. they want to ratchet up the carbon price and ratchet up the number of businesses that will be impacted by carbon price, in order to use that as the main tool to hit net zero. So that's the rhetoric. Some of the stuff that's come out in the UK ETS consultation is consistent with that. And I think the fact that the government have chosen not to intervene in the carbon price market in the past 6 months, even with the price exceeding the cap level at which they could have exceeded, sends out a very clear message that they do want carbon price drive quite a lot of the net zero trajectory. So carbon price is going to be important going forward, and that's one of the reasons I don't see it coming back down. One policy that we're expecting, that there's been quite a bit of talk about, it's not yet come out, the consultation's not yet out, we are expecting it out this year, is the rebalancing of final consumption levies from electric onto gas bills. Now, some people listening today may have an energy intensive industry exemption, but most people won't. So what this effectively means is that the government have said that one of the policies they're going to implement is to take the FCL costs, which is roughly 40 quid a megawatt hour on electricity costs, and start to shift them over onto gas. So that's going to have a double whammy impact. It's going to make electricity cheaper, which opens up opportunities for the electrification of heat and using electricity to reduce Scope 1 emissions. And it's going to make gas more expensive over the long run. So that's going to be a key policy push factor going forward towards people reducing Scope 1 emissions. Talk about this border carbon tax. Obviously, the fear is if the UK starts to push up the costs on fossil fuel consumption for UK industries, that will just offshore the carbon production to countries with a lower cost of carbon. So again, one of the government proposals to counteract that is that they're going to introduce this border carbon tax. We've not seen a huge amount of detail on that yet, but I think that's going to become quite a relevant discussion point for most businesses going forward. And what we have seen, to pick up Sumit's point at the start about get on with business as usual becoming the mantra, we have seen that the energy security strategy published by the government has a number of key themes that are going to be relevant to many people and to their net zero journey. So we know that there's going to be a focus on electrification. That just now means heat pumps for certainly at the domestic level, but our view is that electrification offers some wider opportunities than just heat pumps, important though they will be. So I think for many businesses, and particularly around the kind of heat for buildings, electrification strategy will drive a lot of the short and medium term options. There's a serious focus on hydrogen, and a doubling of the green hydrogen target within the energy security strategy has been seen in some of the recent hydrogen strategy documents. So big focus on hydrogen, and we see massive opportunities there for the right business and with the right level of demand in the right location. I don't know if anyone will have looked at it, but the hydrogen business model is not for the faint-hearted. So we're intending to take a couple of projects forward within that hydrogen business model bid process at the back end of the summer. It's not going to be for everybody. There's a lot of complexity in there, and some of the ways the policy has been defined and developed are, they're not the most straightforward for businesses to digest and get on with. And the other big theme in the energy security strategy is around carbon capture and storage. So this is going to be, it's a big area of focus. There's a bit of read across between that and shifting grey hydrogen to blue hydrogen. But I think we're going to see CCUS become increasingly important going forward, but it's probably of limited application and value to most people that are listening today. So that's the second category completed, the kind of the policy push factors. And I think what's amazed me is that even in the face of COVID, even in the face of this cost of living crisis that we're facing, is the continued commitment to net zero that we're seeing across society as a whole. And I think that's because the scientific consensus it's impossible to ignore now. Bar a few loonies on the margins, I think there's a general consensus now that around the causes and consequences of climate change, and I think having COP26 last year obviously amplified that within the UK. So we're still seeing end user customers continue to focus on sustainability. And in response to that, we're seeing our customer facing brands targeting their supply chain to reduce their own carbon emissions. Because if you're a big customer facing brand, the easiest way for you to decarbonise is to force your supply chain to do it. So their scope 3 reductions become somebody else's scope 1 and scope 2 reductions. And so a lot of the companies we work with are feeling real pressure from their customer base to reduce their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And alongside that, we're seeing companies sign up to either sectoral commitments. So as I mentioned, we've recently commissioned a project in the whisky sector. Whisky sector signed up some quite serious carbon reduction commitments by 2030 as on a sectoral level. So we're seeing companies sign up to their sectoral commitments, but also individual companies are signing up to science-based and net zero targets. And once you've signed up to that, you have to get on and deliver against it. And in addition to that, the streamlined energy and carbon reporting standard means that businesses are now required to publish in their accounts, or businesses above a certain size, I should say, are required to publish in their accounts what they're doing around carbon emissions and to benchmark the carbon and say what it is they're doing to improve that. And what that means, that's got two consequences. One is that it's making the progress against those commitments very transparent. So I can go into any company's accounts now and see what they are saying about their carbon, what their carbon footprint is, and you know, it's very transparent. So it avoids greenwashing is no longer enough, basically. And equally, because that's signed off by chief exec, finance director, or company secretary, or a combination of, and the auditors, the fact that the chief execs are having to put their name to these accounts means that decarbonisation's becoming increasingly relevant and important to them. And I think that the headline message of all of this stuff is that it's a bit, decarbonisation's gone from being a nice to have to being a bit of an existential strategic threat. So if you are a business in a sector that's fairly competitive and all your competitors are taking steps to decarbonise, you risk being the dinosaur that's left behind. So you could argue that you know, that will be fine, but I think there's a point where people are just going to stop buying and stop doing businesses with people who aren't doing anything to decarbonise. So that's I think the big game changer. It's not really anymore about I want to decarbonise if it saves me money. It's about I've got to decarbonise, otherwise I'm going to go. I'm not going to be. My business isn't going to survive. And I think that's a good time to ask the poll question, Sumit. So
it is indeed fascinating stuff. And remember, keep your questions in. Here's the poll question for you. So it is: how confident do you feel your business or organisation will achieve its net zero strategy? How confident are you? Very likely, we've got targets and we're on track. Relatively sure, we've got set goals, but progress is slow. We don't have one. There you go. Would you like to vote now, ladies and gents? So there you go. There it is. How confident do you feel your business or organisation will achieve its net zero strategy? Vote now. Do you want to let that run as we carry on, Stuart?
Yes, I will do.
So please vote anytime now. Cool. Right, I'll hand back to you to we'll look at the poll at the end.
Thanks, Sumit. So that's hopefully set the context around what we see as, and hopefully it's helpful to people to think about those three categories. I mean, what a talk like today is designed to do is to, you know, I'm aware that in this type of event that we're generally preaching to the converted. So most of you who are on today are going to be the evangelists in your organisation for decarbonisation, and I'm hopeful that thinking about these drivers in those three key clusters is quite a helpful way to allow you to shape your board papers and your talks with your colleagues about the pressures that are coming on for decarbonisation. So if that sets the context, then the question is, what can you do now to get on with it? As I said, my view is that this isn't anymore about, I'll take a few baby steps now and I'll wait and see, and come 2030 we'll think about getting on with some decarbonisation. This is now about what can you do now to get on with decarbonisation. So CCUS is getting a bit of time, carbon capture. It's getting a bit of airplay, it's getting a bit of government support. There's quite a lot of talk about it. My view is that, with the exception of a few of the big industrial clusters where there'll be a strategic approach to this, the real short-term opportunities are going to be quite limited for a lot of people in terms of carbon capture. So some of you will potentially disagree with that, but if you do, I guess it's because you're already on with it and you're potentially sitting next to one of those clusters. So my view is that unless CCUS is on your radar in a pretty serious way, then it's not something that you're going to be getting on with soon. Hydrogen is the great hope of the energy strategy. I think Boris Johnson's referred to it as the super fuel. I am a believer in hydrogen. And the reason I am is because the key challenge that we're facing is not renewable generation anymore of electricity. It's storage, and it's what do we do with all our renewable power when there's no demand for it, or we can't get that power to the markets. So I think hydrogen's got a massive role to play. We've got a list of projects that we're working through, and we're intending to take 2 projects into the hydrogen business model allocation this summer. So this is a space that we're actively playing in. I'm interested to speak to anybody who'd like to explore that with us. I think it's going to be quite challenging for businesses to absorb the hydrogen strategy and the whole auction approach and try and develop their own project. So I think there'll be a few who can get on with it, but it's, as I've said here, it's not for the faint-hearted. There's quite a lot of complexity in the requirements you have to meet around the low carbon hydrogen standard to be eligible to bid into this current auction. We're all over it because we've got the time and the energy to devote to it. So we're definitely focused on hydrogen. We see big opportunities there. I think for the next 12 months, the people who get on with it, it's going to be as a result of being successful in this auction process. And that's not going to be everybody. So I'm happy to discuss hydrogen with people because I think it's got massive potential. But if it's something you're thinking about, you're going to need to get into it properly in a serious way to have any chance of success in the short term. I think the electrification of heat's a very interesting area. We think that what's been fascinating about the energy price shocks that we've seen over the winter has that despite the growth of renewables, gas is still setting the marginal cost of electricity. So electrification of thermal demand has huge potential, and we're taking forward a number of projects that are around how we use electricity flexibly to help people decarbonise heat. I'm a big believer in heat pumps, and we'd love to do some heat pumps projects. What we're finding the challenges are at the moment with that is that for industrial decarbonisation, there's a technological question, so the ability to get up to the right temperatures. But one of the main challenges is that gas is setting the marginal cost of electricity, and roughly, and that's predominantly set by the CCGTs, which are, let's just say, 40% efficient. So whilst gas is driving the electricity price, anybody locking in a baseload electricity price with a heat pump is going to not be able to beat gas. So if you've got a heat pump that's a COP of 3 to 1, and electricity is always 3 times the price, or wholesale power price is always 3 times the price of wholesale gas price, because those two are moving together, you're never better off doing a heat pump than burning gas at the moment, unless you're paying the carbon tax. And the guys who are paying the carbon tax are generally the people who are going to challenge to get a heat pump to work. So we see some challenges around the commercialization of heat pumps within the industrial sector just now, but it's an area that is going to come in the future. Where we see the short-term opportunity around electrification of heat is thinking about how you can use power flexibly. So what we're going to see with the growth of renewables, and we're already seeing, is that the power price moves around a lot. So there's a fundamentally different set of economics if you're locking in a baseload power price compared to playing flexibly in relation to the power price. So i.e., if it's very windy in this country, and particularly in Scotland, power price should go low. That presents some opportunities. But if it's not windy, power price will be high. And baseload power is tracking baseload gas price just now. So there's no strategic cost rationale for locking in baseload electrification of heat at the moment, because it's not cost effective. Where the interesting dynamic is around how you can use power flexibly to decarbonise some of your thermal demand. So that's an area that we're very much focused on. And I think that's where I see the same mindset and the same approach applies towards hydrogen. So that's where I'm personally seeing the opportunities just now. It's around hydrogen, and it's around flexible electrification of heat. And they're quite difficult concepts for businesses to get their head around. But I think in the short term, that's where we see the big opportunities. And if that's something that people are interested in getting a bit more insight into or exploring more fully, then I'd be delighted to talk to them, because we're always interested to see what we can do to help businesses decarbonise.
Brilliant.
Yes, so that's it, Sumit. We have we do have a number of clean energy briefing papers available on our website. So if it goes into some of these themes and trends that I've talked about in a lot more detail. So please feel free to search for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So have a look at that. Right, brilliant. Thanks for the presentation. Let's go to the poll, and then pretty much a good split there. So 25% very likely, 50% relatively sure we've set goals, but not, and 25% we do not have a net zero strategy. Now, okay, this is a snap poll, but as you said, most people on this are interested, and yet a quarter of them still don't have a strategy. That's probably not that surprising, I suppose, is it? It's that exact moment you said at the beginning, which is there was a feeling perhaps even just a year ago it's something for next decade. It's now really caught us, especially with what's happening with Ukraine as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really the key message, Sumit. It was, I genuinely thought 2020s was going to be the decade of kind of tinker around, bit of R&D, try a few things. It's just not playing out like that.
Yeah,
that people know that they need to get on with it now, and it's great. I'm actually surprised. I think it's great that 25% of people think they're on track.
Yeah. I'm amazed at that, actually.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to do questions for the next sort of 10 minutes or so, ladies and gents. So start putting them in. We've got a couple here anyway, but let me just start with one for you. So push pull, the old push you pull me. It's really funny when you talk to people, and obviously we've got the Big Zero show coming up, and you guys will be there, and hopefully a lot of our audience will be there. Is it really a question of we need more push from government? You know, you've had Ofgem talking about new legislation. You've had the government, as you said, putting a plethora of things out there, trying to show a strategy, although some would say not enough. There is money. There's projects going into batteries. There's money going into decarbonisation, and all of it is being backed up by regulation. Is it that, do you think, that will kick people more into doing action rather than the other bit, which is the kind of, the pull side that you said about kind of demand from customers and the base? Many think that actually you do need that regulatory framework to push more than to say, hey, let's do it. What's your take?
I think you need all three. So, and with the third one being the financial case.
Yeah.
So the financial case is helped now by the high fossil price. So
Yeah.
we're very realistic. We know that at the end of the day, every project we do goes in front of a board. This is the ones where we're co-locating in customer sites. So it goes in front of the board, and on that board is generally a finance director who may or may not be fully fully on board with the whole net zero thing. So to get it through a board, you need to have, as well as we want to do this and it's the right thing to do, you need something there that gives it and this is why we must do it angle. And that we must do it can either be financially driven or it can be regulatory policy driven. So if you know, come 2026, for example, you're no longer allowed to burn oil and you're an oil user, that's a reason to get on with something. And ditto, if you know that the carbon price is going to go to 150 quid a tonne because that's the trajectory that the government policy set and you believe in it, then that's a reason to do something. So people need a reason to do things, and even the real pioneers and the progressive ones who just want to do it because it's the right thing to do, that business case becomes a much more straightforward sell internally when there's that compulsion to do it either because of cost or because of policy. So I think the reality is you need a bit of all three.
I mean, the tragedy that's unfolding in Ukraine, I did hear from someone who said, actually, in a way, this might be, and we have to put that aside, right, what's going on and the cost in human life, which is appalling. But there is an element here, which is actually it has, because of what's happened with global prices, it's pushed people to take action quicker. So out of the carnage and the destruction, maybe some slight glimmer that actually there could be something positive, and we all want the world to end obviously as soon as possible. But do you see that as well, that actually because of what you've said, the price of carbon shooting up, 50 quid sounded quite generous, now it's 80 to 100, that actually these big global issues, supply, demand, wars, may actually push us all towards action quicker than we might have done.
Yeah, I think it has to. So the geopolitics of energy.
Well, it's fundamental, isn't it? I mean, that is energy, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. Energy is geopolitics, and if there was ever a kind of, there's never been a clearer message to get off gas than there is now. And if you look at what the Scandinavians did in the oil price shock, or how they responded to the oil price shock in the 70s, was they effectively invested heavily in district heating, and that's given them massive flexibility in their energy mix going forward. And that was in response to a price shock, not a geopolitical war shock. So I think the fundamental drivers for me were strong, and this has only amplified them. And even if you look at that geopolitical level, if you don't buy gas from Russia at the moment, you shift to somebody else. You're not addressing the fundamental issue, which is how do we capitalize on all these renewables that we have within our own control.
One of the things you've done, and I'm going to come to questions in a minute, so keep them coming, ladies and gents, but one thing you've done is, you've looked at industry, right? So whiskey, good one. I don't know if that was your personal choice there, Stuart, but very good. Whiskey, one, people growing tomatoes, and then obviously something you wouldn't think of actually, but the luxury yachts, the Sunseeker side of things. And just this week, we covered a story about Volvo making now their first industrial vehicles, like their kind of diggers, from decarbonised steel, right? So basically hydrogen used for the embodied carbon. Are you seeing a shift, not just with obviously big customers like that you've mentioned in your presentation, but people starting to see that actually there is a way now to look at how you do that heavy decarbonisation of manufacturing at source, so that you actually then go, as you become part of the supply chain, you go, actually, my product is already clean for you. So if you're scope 3 at Tesco or whoever it is that you're supplying, you've got that ticked off. Is that just kind of one-offs, or is this a kind of more growing story in major manufacturing? Because you do some big clients.
Yeah, I'd say it's now a universal pressure. So, and it's, at the end of the day, it is being predominantly driven by the customer-facing brand. So, to put it into sort of simple terms, we used to speak to glasshouses a lot, and they would always be keen to decarbonise as long as they saved quite a lot of money. Now they need to do it because the supermarkets are asking them about their scope 1 emissions, because that's the supermarket scope 3 emissions. It's as simple as that. And it's the same if you look at whiskey. They want to decarbonise their own scope 1 emissions, but equally they're putting a lot of pressure back up their supply chain to, if you think about what that is, that's about the raw materials, so the malt. That's a big source of carbon emissions for them. So hence the likes of the project with Muntons that I mentioned, that's a big decarbonisation impact for beer and food and whiskey. Ditto some of the other maltings that we're working with. And then it's about the glass manufacturing process. So you get brands like the big beer brands, for example, or the big drinks brands putting pressure on their manufacturing base. And we know glass is that's as hard as steel to decarbonise, but you know, they're big furnaces that are now seriously thinking about what they can do, whether that's hydrogen or moving towards electrification in future.
Yeah. A couple of questions. Let's ask this first one. You showed a chart, which I think maybe I can actually see if I can find it, and I'll pull this up for the audience member who asked this question. And they said, I think it's this one. There we go. Right. So this chart here, and the question is the data on future energy policy costs publicly available? I don't know if this is a projection or this is from base figures, but the question is, this the yellow and the red lines, where can that data be accessed?
So the historic stuff you can just get off the BEIS website. I can give a link for that. The carbon price line we've just flatlined. You can pick your own projection basically about, you know, Bloomberg or whoever about future carbon pricing. I just flatlined it in this one. The yellow and the red line are actually, we get kind of daily briefings from some of the gas suppliers on where they see what are the actual forward market prices for gas and power, and that's a direct lift from them. So I don't think it's publicly available as such, but if you it happens to be Corona that we get the daily briefing from, because they supply our gas for our peakers. So I think you would be able to get that. And similarly, if you look in something like ICE, you'll also see a forward. You know, this is spot price. This is forward buying of these commodities. So this is the price that in theory you could lock in at today on that futures market. So perhaps not publicly available, i.e. they're not government, but different suppliers if you're viewing that. Yeah.
Next question. What do you see as the risk of, and you touched on it again, what do you see as the risk of carbon leakage with the UK driving towards net zero through the UK ETS at a different rate, for example, than the EU, and not just the EU, but globally as well? I mean, there's a risk of that, isn't there?
There is, and I think it's one. But, you know, I'm not a government policymaker, but I think it's one that government are aware of and giving some thought to. Hence, why they're talking about this carbon border tax. I think, and similarly, the other question that there sees is a bit. It covers this border adjustment point. So I think if you're a steel manufacturer, for example, that's probably more of a relevant question to you than if you are a food and drink manufacturer, just in terms of where there's certain products in certain markets where domestic producers are always going to have an advantage over imports. Again, whiskey's an example of that. It's not so much a carbon tax or border adjustment thing that's going to cause the issue there. It's just the general any increase in cost of living. So I think a border carbon tax is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Whether or not we actually diverge that much from the EU ETS price going forward remains to be seen. We might be a little bit more go-y than it, but I don't see us being, for example, double the price. So, but let's see what the carbon border tax proposal actually comes out with.
Yeah. And as you said, there's another question there that touches on this. Capture and storage incurs huge costs. So when we talk about ETS and net zero, it's not appropriate to have is it not appropriate to have a cap and save rather than trade and let our grid produce be intrinsic? Same goes with border adjustments. I suppose that is another thing. I mean, you talked about kind of big centres, and I know some serious people up in Bays who really believe that CCS could make a big difference, particularly in those big junctions, particularly like Hull and places like that. What's your thinking around
that? I think I don't have a particularly firm or a purist view on it. I think we're in the need is so pressing that whatever's going to work needs to be tried. Obviously, there's going to be some challenges around it, and yeah, particularly if there's a challenge around the whole grey to blue hydrogen, which is going to be the anchor for a lot of this carbon capture and storage infrastructure. So there's definitely quite a lot of complexity to work through in relation to how that whole CCUS works. And I think it's going to be quite expensive, as the question highlighted. So how that's paid for and financed is going to need it's probably going to need a bit of intervention there. I'm not sure I fully I think the person who asked that's probably a lot more intelligent than I am. I'm not sure I fully understood the kind of the distinction between cap and trade and cap and save in the way the question was phrased there. But I do think we need a market price for carbon, and the more people that are impacted by that, the more progress we'll make on decarbonisation. And if you accept that, then you do have to think about things like border adjustments and border carbon taxes. So that's going to be an important strategic area. But again, I always bring it back to what actually helps businesses make a decision to kickstart a decarbonisation project today. And you're either playing in CCUS and you're getting into it in a big way, or you should almost just ignore it.
I mean, there is this, again, your slide here, which I'm showing to everyone now, the pull factors. If you put what you've said aside for a moment, I suppose this is really what, has come out of COP. This whole, what are you doing? Nearly every brand we cover talks about what they're trying to do, right? So whether it's your KFC or your Dulux paint or whoever it is, everything's got, I picked up a tin of Ronseal and at the end of the my garden table, and it was like, this is now made with so much recyclable, and this is where our footprint is. If you look at where we are right now post COP, and obviously ahead of the next one in Egypt, do you think that this is actually now, from what you've said, pushing things much more, that the kind of, I need to do this, I'm being told to do this, I've got these governmental things to pull me into signing off and showing my strategies, but actually basically at the end of the day it comes down to one thing: consumer pressure? Yeah,
I think that's it, and that's been the big change in the last 2 to 3 years, which was previously it was always, oh, this is a nice to have, and if it saves me some money, I'll do it. It's now, right, can I do this? I need to do this, and how can I do it in a way that minimizes the additional costs? Not, it has to save me money. So I think that's what the big change has been that we've seen on the ground. People now know they have to do this, and you're right. Every brand is saying, this is a green tin of paint, or this is people can't just make those statements anymore, because you can now, if you were so minded, you could go into that company's accounts and see what their actual carbon footprint per tin of paint was, or per pound of turnover, or everyone's got their own metric, and you can compare different companies. So, and I think we're going to see a lot more focus on that. I've not quite seen it yet, but I'm pretty sure there'll be some bright IT businesses out there thinking about the algorithms that actually that trawl through companies' house and pull out carbon intensity and compare it across different businesses. So if business A is making a claim, they'd better be able to back it up now, because otherwise they're going to, that negative publicity in response to greenwashing is going to be that'll become a bit of a business brand killer.
Yeah. One of the last questions, almost out of time, and this is actually a fair point. Would the benefits of switching to alternatives to carbon outweigh the costs? And this is a fair point. Example, materials to create renewable energy like solar can be really destructive to the environment. People talk about batteries and all of that. And again, this is one of those ones that businesses have to look at. Do you run a van that's a diesel van till the end of its life, and actually you're saving the carbon rather than switching to EVs and what you're doing now? So when you're advising businesses to take a step, there is that cost element, but there's also the kind of carbon and cost element. What do you say on that? Because the obvious answer would be, no, this is better for you in the long term. But there are some legitimate concerns about the impacts of changing and shifting things over.
There are, and there's probably two quite distinct categories of it. So you get things like, we're going to build a new energy centre, and we're pouring some concrete, and that concrete is a carbon footprint. Yeah, exactly. So there's stuff that gets incurred in the normal costs, if you like, of just doing a project, and you've got to have an eye on that. But normally the footprints, at the scale projects we're doing, normally that footprint's so small that it's quickly overcome by the savings you make.
Savings, yeah.
So that's one category. The second category is probably more around the rare minerals. And again, that brings you back into geopolitics and mining, and who's controlling those rare metals. And there's definitely a macro issue to face there. But I think it's always easy for businesses to find a reason not to do something. My view is that the need is so overwhelming that unless you're doing something that is demonstrably wrong or bad or destructive, then the priority should be trying to save the carbon. We're sensitive to it. We're looking at hydrogen. There's issues there around the iridium for the electrolyzers, for example, and the global market scale for that, in the same way that there's the lithium question for batteries and some of the other rare metals for solar. So you have to be sensitive to these things, but equally, at a macro level, there'll be other people worried about and thinking about that, and you've got to do what you can do to contribute to the challenge we all face.
Right, we've got a lot of time for one last question before we go, and it's a quick one, but basically, in essence, this question is quite long, but it says, be it policy or societal factors, isn't it better to future-proof businesses to have a user pay principle? Why cap pricing, carbon pricing? Why can't we have a cap on usage to help? Let's not use as much, let's not produce enough, because that is sustainability in itself. And I suppose that's the one thing to end with, that we've got to look at whether we do things and whether we need to, but also what can we do to save, which I don't think the government personally has addressed enough of.
Yes, I think it's a good point, and my understanding, if I'm reading that question correct, is that we do have a cap and trade system at the ETS level at the moment. I'm not sure if this is somebody who's not impacted by ETS. So, i.e., you get a certain amount of allowances for free. Those allowances reduce each year. So if you don't use those allowances, you do get the benefit of not using them, and therefore you're getting the benefit of saving. So yeah, there's people who are stronger on cap and trade systems and the most effective way to create an optimal market for it. And I think cap and trade and save always has an advantage. So but because you can trade, then you're getting credit for your saving is normally the approach that would be taken. So I would agree, I think, with the sentiment of that question.
Yeah. We're out of time. There you go. Thank you very much, Stuart. For anyone who's really interested, go to the AMP website, search AMP Clean Energy Briefing Papers. Stuart, thank you very much for today. Really good. I liked it. Great session, as ever, mate. And looking very smart.
Thanks, Sumit. Always nice to catch up with you.
Tomorrow we'll be talking hydrogen. So same at 11 o'clock. Please rate the webinar. Tell us what you thought. And as I said, have a search then. Stuart, if there's any questions afterwards, we'll pass them on to you. I'm sure that you'll be happy to answer. Yeah?
Yes, indeed. Please feel free to get in touch.
Okay, ladies and gents, thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Cheers, Stuart.
Thanks, Sumit. Cheers.